Hello, this is Jolene, and this is this week's episode of Jolene's Book and Writers Talk. Today, we welcome Miss Mallory OConnor, a retired University of Florida professor, and she is also an award-winning writer of both fiction and nonfiction. When she was 4 years old, her mother bought her a Brombach baby grand piano. She wanted her to become a classical musician like her grandfather, who was a violinist and a composer. Although she had talent, she was unwilling to devote 5 or 6 hours a day to practicing, and she hated performing. She was much happier riding her horse along the American River in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, or writing and illustrating stories about little girls who love to write. Please welcome Miss Mallory
I'm
OConnor.
Mallory OConnor, and I've had what I would call a varied career in a bunch of different directions. I started out as an artist, and then I got interested in art history, so I went that direction. Then I went off to University of California at Davis, and my art teacher in my first class was a very interesting young man who was just getting his graduate degree, and a year later we were married. So, so I married my art teacher, and then we moved around quite a lot. He took a job at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and then he had studied architecture in Mexico City, so he wanted to go back. So we went to Mexico, and then we came back to California, and then we went to Ohio. Took a job at Ohio University, so I finished up my degree at Ohio University and then took a master's degree in art history and another master's degree in American history. And we both looked around for jobs, but the only place that offered both of us a job was the University of Florida. And so that's how we ended up in Florida. And I was taught art history there. John taught art. We both launched into an academic career. However, I loved writing and continued to write fiction off and on, but I wasn't really very serious about it. I did have an agent in New York, and he tried to sell one of my books, but the publisher said it was too feminist. So well, this was back in 72.
Okay, there you go.
I started writing a historical fiction, kind of an autobiographical book called American River. When I sent him the manuscript, he said, it's 1,000 pages long. There's no way I can shop this to people. An unknown author, 1,000 pages, get over it, you know? So I put the book on the shelf and went on with other things for 25 years. But then after we retired from our academic positions in 2005, I started writing again and got out the books that I had written and started redoing them and polishing them, and found out that the 1,000 page book made a really good trilogy.
Ooh, nice.
About 300 pages. So that's how American River was eventually published. And after that, I started working. I wanted to do something about climate because I'm very involved in environmental issues.
Right.
So Dan Brown, who was a very interesting journalist, introduced me to the genre of Cli-Fi, climate fiction. And I started writing climate fiction and have done 3 books of that and working on a 4th. But in the meantime, my husband and I collaborated on a cookbook memoir. And I can talk more about that in a few minutes. But that's kind of a roundup of where I have been over the last 70 years.
The next point, we usually talk about your latest publication.
Well, this was a very special book. We kind of bonded over food and wine. And in fact, our first date, my husband-to-be asked me over and cooked dinner for me.
Ooh.
And I said, oh, this is a keeper. Don't let this guy get away. So his father was a chef, and my grandmother was a pastry chef. My mother was a very, very dedicated and explorer in terms of all kinds of different food. So we really both had a deep interest in food and wine. I always kept a journal whenever we had a special occasion, a dinner party, an anniversary, a birthday, whatever. I kept a journal of who was there and what we had for dinner and what wine we had and where we were, and kept pictures of the festivities. And that became the basis for our cookbook memoir. 60 years worth of dates and places and people and recipes, and that became our COVID project when we kind of got locked down and we couldn't entertain and we're going to say, okay, now we've got time to work on this. So we worked on it. And instead of doing photographs of the recipes, John did original artworks for each one, all 107 of them. So the illustrations of the recipes are his original still lifes. And so I tell people that the book was a cookbook, a memoir, an art book, and a love story.
I'm assuming it's in color, right?
Oh yeah, full color.
Full color. Both.
And we found a publisher who could pull it off. So
nice.
Happy about that.
What formats do you have it in?
Soft cover and hardback. Atmosphere Press was our publisher. I think they did a beautiful job on it. So it's available from them. It's up on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. People can order it from me if they want to save money.
There you go. Okay, so that was my next question. You have a website?
Yes.
Do you have it set up to accept payments and you're able to sell from it?
I don't. I just have a contact, and if somebody wants to contact me, I can mail them a book, and they mail me a check, or I can look at doing something credit card wise, and then I can mail them a book. And it is, as I said, less expensive than it is if you get it on Amazon. And I get more because I don't get much on royalties.
This is true. I'm trying to convince more and more writers to take the plunge and purchase your book at the author price, tack on $5, and then sell it. Probably make a lot more money.
Absolutely. And I've done a lot of that because I've ordered numerous copies of the book and done pretty well with selling it myself at various events. So,
speaking of events, what would you consider your top 3 that you seem to have the best success at selling your book?
I think usually book talks, whether that's at a library or a private gathering or a class of some kind. I just find if I talk about the book, people get interested and then they want to buy a copy. So that's been a very, very good way to market the book and to make people aware of it and have a lot of fun at the same time.
More personalized events.
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's the thing to put in the hopper there. Are you on social media?
Yeah, Facebook, a little bit on Instagram, not much. Should do more with that because of the imagery, pictures. It's a no-brainer. I don't really do Twitter because of a lot of things.
Have you ever thought about using Facebook to sell your books?
I've done some Facebook ads. I've posted a lot of things that had to do with my writing and my book and what I'm working on and so on, which always seems to get, a nice response. I did a post on Facebook. I was at a Florida Authors and Publishers Conference in Orlando recently. The President's Awards celebration, I got a silver medal for my cookbook. Happy with that and shared that with people on Facebook and got a lot of congrats.
Very cool. A lot of these awards will give you a graphic to put on your book or...
Yes. A little sticker.
Right. So you can look forward to having that sticker on your book in the future.
Oh, yeah. I'll use those stickers up and put them on the books. People like to see that, I think. So,
well, yeah, it's just, you spend all that time on it. You might as well get a little bit of accolades too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the second one of the Florida Authors and Publishers President's Awards that I've gotten. I got one for my American River for the trilogy that I wrote and published back in 2017.
Are you a member of any other groups besides the Writers Alliance of Gainesville? Any writing groups?
Writing groups, I'm a member of Florida Writers Association and then also Florida Authors and Publishers. And I'm also a member of the Northern California Authors and Publishers. Since my first book, The American River Trilogy, is set in California, and that organization is in exactly that part of the world, that same town. I did a book talk out there that was very well received. So that was another group of sort of friends. And then also, it's not an organization, but my high school has really kept tabs on one another. And we have a wonderful monthly newsletter. I tell people in that what I'm up to and, what I've been doing. I've gotten lots of feedback from people that way.
Do you have a newsletter set up on your website?
I don't have a newsletter. I just post a fairly regular basis on the website. I wanted to do a blog, but I haven't gotten it pulled together yet. So maybe I'll get around to that. There's a lot of information because my husband and I have the website jointly. All of the illustrations that he did for the cookbook are on the website, for example. There's a lot of different information there that takes a while to work your way through.
Next question, as an author, when you say that you have a publisher, is it a print on demand publisher or is it an actual person who bought your book and paid you a fee?
No, I decided to work with a hybrid publisher. Now, I have two nonfiction books that were published by University Press of Florida. So in that case, I was working with a more traditional publisher, but then I was in an academic role at the time, so it made sense in terms of University Press of Florida publishing work by a professor at Florida. So, and those were a lot of fun. I had a good time with both of them. The first one was called Lost Cities of the Ancient Southeast. The opening line was Columbus didn't discover America. And then I talked about the wonderful indigenous cultures of the Southeast that many people aren't even aware of, as they are, like, say, Aztec culture in Mexico, because in the Southeast they built with lumber and mud and there's not much left.
Yeah.
And so a photographer and I roamed around the Southeast as far north as Cahokia, we're near St. Louis, and down the Mississippi and all over the Southeastern area, documenting Native American sites. I wrote about their culture and their art and religion and so on. It was wonderful because there's an architect, William Morgan, who had done a book about Native American architecture. And Bill kindly let me use some of his floor plans and plots and drawings and architectural studies and include those in the book.
A write-up of him on one of my websites.
He was a wonderful architect. I just love Bill's work. And the other book was called Florida's American Heritage River, Images from the St. Johns region. It was a kind of visual history of the St. Johns. I collaborated on that with a photographer, Gary Monroe, who has a wonderful collection of Florida kitsch. He'd done a whole thing on the mermaids at Weeki Wachee and the people at Silver Springs and TV trays and flamingos and all of that wonderful stuff. So it was both fine art, sort of tourist stuff.
Does he have a website?
I think he probably does. Gary Monroe.
Okay.
You could
I will look him up.
Google him. He is a wonderful photographer. He did several books about the Jewish community in Miami as another one of his particular interests. It was a lot of fun to work with. Also, Bill Belleville, the environmentalist and author of River of Lakes, wrote the foreword for our book. So that was nice. Working with the University Press was gratifying. I kind of do like the combination in the hybrid presses of, in writing fiction, I really didn't know where to start in terms of marketing or distribution, because Archway is a subsidiary of Simon & Schuster. They had access to a wonderful distribution network. I was able to get a lot of good information and help from them. So when I published American River. So
being as I'm getting a lot of Gainesville authors this month, as academician, a professor, and you're publishing through the university press system. How does that work as far as, it's not like a normal author kind of thing, right? The proceeds, do they split the proceeds with you? Do you have a contract, or is that just part of your teaching thing? Or
I had a publishing contract with them.
okay.
And I got royalties just as you would from any traditional publisher on a regular basis. I still occasionally get a royalties check from them, even though the two books, one was published in 1995 and the other one in 2009. But occasionally I get a nice check from University of Florida Press. I'm like, oh, that's good. Thank you. That's a surprise. But you do your regular contract with them, and then they do really what a traditional publisher would do in terms of doing the book and showing you the galleys and with some editorial work and the sort of regular thing you would expect from any traditional publisher.
Well, I wanted to know, because all the stuff that's happening with the writers and the writers' strike in Hollywood and AI coming in, and I ask all the authors, how do they feel about that? So my next question would be, do you really think AI is going to take over the writer's job, creativity-wise, or?
I would hesitate to say that would be the case. Of course, I am not a scientist. I'm not that familiar with AI, except in a kind of, long distance way. In one sense, I really wouldn't care because I will do what I do anyway. AI, I think, might have a place. I think that the issue of identity and copyright and so on and so forth is one that needs to be ironed out. With any new technology like that, you need to find out how that's going to function. I think that's an important part of the writers' strike, is figuring out how original work can be kept under their control, you might say. But that's, of course, been the case with anything having to do with the digital world, how copyright issues have been impacted and what the rules are. And, the rules change. You have to kind of slide along and say, okay, what's coming up? What's the new angle? I have a wait and see attitude. And also, since I don't make my quote living from being a writer, okay, yeah, write me something cool, AI. Maybe I'll read it.
They've had people do that already, but they're doing it the wrong way. One, they're sneaking in the clauses into the publishing contracts that says, well, we're going to give samples of your work to the AI to study and create new stuff, but we're not going to pay you for that privilege.
Yeah, that's big time bad. But,
Right.
having been part of the art world for all my career, that's just an ongoing issue with plagiarism and with artists stealing other artists' work and images and taking credit for it and selling. Yeah, anyway, and the gallery dealers and the whole gallery world, that's not new. My husband taught a course over at the Levin College of Law with Professor of Law Roy Hunt on art law and copyright. And I'd be very interested to see where that discussion goes, with the whole legal community in terms of art law and copyright and artist rights and so on. It's another new territory. So
it's another way for the lawyers to make more money. I found out recently somebody used the AI to create work in another author's name in her field. When she went to look at her profile, there was books that she'd never written in her name, and Amazon was refusing to take them down because she didn't copyright her name. And so the lawyers got involved and they got the work taken down. But the possibilities of us having to copyright our own name to protect us in that situation.
Interesting. Yeah. I've had author friends that have picked up books and then said, wait a minute, I wrote that. Another author had incorporated it, in some cases word for word, into something they'd written. So the problem is not new, though it may be in a different iteration these days.
I tell any of my clients is I know that when a work is affixed with a date on your computer or in hand and dated or whatever, it's supposed to be copyrighted right then. But as an extra protection, I say take the $45, take your finished product and register it and get that certificate.
Absolutely.
It gives you added protection. It gives your lawyer something to say, well, she did this. Here's the official government seal. Right. And also, those are transferable to your children or your grandchildren.
That's right, because they're good for a certain period of time, 70 years or something like that. Yeah.
75 years after the original author passes away, that copyright is still good so that you can put it in a trust or your children or grandchildren can have it transferred. The Copyright Office recently set up, it's in beta, but they're allowing people to do bulk transfers from authors who passed away to the next of kin, and they're not charging a big fee for that. For like 50 titles, it's $100. On average, as an author, over the last 10 years, how much do you think you spent for your books to get them out there, like an average price, just to get them on the market first?
One book or for all the books?
You choose.
Well, per book, I would say I've been spending about $3,000 overall in terms of publication costs and promotion and travel, everything. Okay. So that's quite an investment. As I said, since I'm not tied to the idea of having to make money from my books, that gives me an advantage in several ways that I can think of. One is that I can write whatever I want. I don't have to try to please some particular audience. I would hope, that I would have people that liked the book and wanted to follow along and know more about me in the book and so on. But I have absolutely no interest in being a celebrity. Somebody asked me, would I rather have, money or fame? I can tell them right away, I'd rather have the money. I know, the heck with the fame thing. I really like being a fly on the wall, actually. When we retired, my husband and I said, oh, great. Now we have an independent income. We can do whatever we want. With our retirement and Social Security and so on, we're very comfortable in terms of lifestyle. That just really frees me up to do whatever I want, go whichever path I want to go.
You just keep right on doing it, girl. Encourage us women because we need it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I've always written about strong women. A lot of my protagonists face really a pile of adversity. And I've been able to draw on a lot of my own experiences of people that I know to just write about how difficult it has been for women to make their mark one way or the other, especially if they don't want to, as I say, kowtow to the industry ideas or whatever. I'm just going to do it my way.
That's good because it's been a long time coming. I've been doing a lot of research on previous women writers and them having to choose men's names and using their initials.
Very interesting. And it's obviously much better than when earlier writers, as you said, had to, like George Sand, for example, writing her books and having to use a man's name and having to publish under a man's name and so on. Whole bunches of women like that. I have a character in my American River series who wants to be a serious artist. And the book is set in the 1960s. She leaves her family and moves to New York to try to make it in the art world. And I really tell some pretty interesting stories about her uphill battle for recognition and just to be able to be recognized, as a serious artist at that time. So
you like to do historical research, right?
I love the research. That's one of my favorite things.
What are your favorite places or resources that you use to do your research with?
Of course, the internet is the go-to for everything these days. I really like to come across treasure, personal letters, or a book that nobody knew about that somebody wrote, diaries, things like that you just come across if you're really looking and you're looking in the right place and you luck out and find something, a treasure that's been discovered or hasn't been really mined for what's there. That's one of my favorite things. I still like libraries. Never know quite what you're going to come across that you wouldn't even think to ask Uncle Google about.
Well, I've discovered newspapers.com, and they have newspapers from around the world that they've been slowly digitizing. It was the National Archives has done quite a lot of Chronicling America series. They've put a lot of microfilm up and digitized it for online viewing. I know that the University of Florida has a lot of newspapers on microfilm already, but the newspapers.com is purchasing these microfilms and converting them over to digital files.
Right.
Well, you have to pay for the subscription, and it's like $80 for 6 months. But you can look up anything and everything. But
I've used travel videos. If I've got a place that I want to talk about and I haven't been there or I haven't been there for a long time, I can go back and look at travel videos of Japan or London. Someplace if I want to toss a character into an adventure or overseas trip. Another thing is historical societies. They can be really, really helpful and give you all kinds of things that probably wouldn't have been published. Nobody would necessarily be aware of them because they're local. The same thing is true of like Oral History Project. That has a wealth of information and details that can be really helpful.
In favor of every historical society receiving grants to digitize their records before they fade away. Because there's software now that if you can get a decent scan of photographs, that it can go in and clean it up and recolor it and so that you have a decent picture.
Another place that I like to poke around in is cemeteries. You get a lot of information from a cemetery. My mother was a librarian. I, was just brought up with tons of books everywhere. She always just let me have at it in terms of her library at home. Never censored anything. If I grabbed Lady Chatterley's Lover or whatever, it was like, oh, okay, when you read that, if you have any questions, let's talk about it, and so on. That was it. But she and I loved to travel together because anywhere we went, her curiosity was just a firebrand. And we would go to cemeteries and we would go to historical societies. And we once did a trip. We had taken a class at Santa Fe on paranormal activity. And she was very interested in ghosts for one reason or another. Planned the whole trip in terms of staying at places that were said to be haunted, all the way up from Florida up to New York and back in the car. It was a wonderful trip. We read books on the way about the places, that we stayed and what the stories were and what the background was and why they were thought to be haunted. And a bed and breakfast in Savannah or a hotel in New York or whatever. And then when she was living at the Atrium at the time, and when we got back, we did a report called Ghosts and Writers, which was a really fun report to do. There is a house in Archer, I think it's the Kosicki house. We took a field trip to when I took this class at Santa Fe on paranormal activity that my mom and I took. It was very interesting. The place is stuffed with Civil War memorabilia. Their whole shtick was, Civil War veterans and Civil War stories and so on. It was quite interesting.
Oh, at Archer. Okay, Archer. Is there anything else that you would like to tell, like a tips for upcoming writers? What would be your top 3 advice?
I would encourage people, before you think of writing for an audience, try writing for yourself. What is that you want to say? What's your voice? Don't imitate somebody just because you think, oh, if I sound like them, I can be popular. Or unless you're just in it for the money, of course, that's always a option, I guess. I would think find your original voice. What do you have to say? What's your particular background that would be important or useful for you to want to talk about? And then also, don't be afraid to just write something. Sure, you might have to go back and it's all in the revision. All good writers talk about how much is in the revision. Revise, 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 Stephen King says. That's another important thing. Once you've written something, think about how you can make it better. Go back, read it aloud. One thing that my husband and I do is we read things aloud to each other. If I read a passage or a chapter or a paragraph even, and he says, no, that doesn't sound right. I don't think they would have said that. That's not believable. Then I have to rethink, okay, why isn't that believable? How could I restructure this to make it work? But those are some things.
Hypothetical question. If you had 20 good, healthy years left, what would be your writing path? Try another genre? Would you continue as you are?
I just think there's a lot to explore out there. And that's one thing I love is exploring. I couldn't say that I would stay with one thing or another because I never know when I'm going to go off in a new direction or what's going to come up in my life or in the world that's going to make me want to look at something new or try something different. Or I'm a curious cat.
Well, I got like 7 books in my head right now. And they need to get out.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're begging to get out.
I know. And the worst thing is, from what I understand from my writer friends, the more you write, the more there's going to be in your head because they empty out and fill back up again.
And also, I'm sorry, but characters are absolutely ruthless. They want their story told, and by golly, you'd better tell it. I get so involved with my characters. I mean, it's like having imaginary friends, I think most authors agree that they just give you, well, holy hell. In terms of, I would never have said that. Yes, you would. No, I wouldn't. You get into arguments with them.
Good writers, their characters have to live for them in order for them to actually write.
Yeah, and they come alive. My goodness. One thing that I do that I have always found it was interesting is that I send off my characters' birthday to astrologers and have them do an astrological chart of my characters because they tell me things that I had no idea.
That's cool.
That my characters would do that or was like that or had done that or that their family had or, whatever. So that is a ton of fun to just find out some interesting things about these quote unquote imaginary people that make them very real.
Do you keep track of them in a notebook or a spreadsheet their characteristics. Does that help you at all?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I have pages and pages of my characters and things that you would never necessarily, use in a book, for example. But what do they have for breakfast? What's their favorite TV show? If somebody gave them $1 million, what would they do with it? Just kind of quirky questions that get you inside their head, figuring out who they are, what they love, what they don't like, And so, as I say, you're never going to probably use it necessarily in a story, but it's there and it brings you closer to them. You know them better.
Miss Mallory, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. I appreciated it.